On my 68th birthday, my son tried to kill me. He didn't use a weapon you could see. He used a memory. He used my favorite drink, a rare single malt whiskey, knowing full well my heart couldn't take it anymore. But he made one fatal mistake. He forgot that sometimes the best gifts are meant to be shared. This is the story of how I uncovered that betrayal and served a glass of justice, ice cold. Stick around to see how it all unfolded. The morning of my 68th birthday began the same way every morning had for the last 3 years, with a silence that was less an absence of sound and more of a presence in itself. It was a heavy, settled quiet that had seeped into the floorboards and plaster of a house once meant for 3. Now holding the space of only 1, I sat on the porch swing, the one Sarah and I had built with our own 4 hands on our first anniversary. It's familiar. Gentle squeak, a lonely rhythm in the stillness. The damp Ohio air, thick with the smell of wet earth and impending autumn, worked its way into my joints. A douleur, persistent ache that served as a constant reminder of my body's limitations. My coffee, its steam long gone, sat untouched in a thick ceramic mug on the porch railing. I rarely drank more than a few sips these days, but the ritual was ingrained. The perking of the machine, the dark aroma filling the kitchen, it was a ghost of mornings past. Mornings filled with the rustle of Sarah turning the newspaper pages, her soft humming along to the radio, the low murmur of conversation that makes a house a home. Now, the silence was the loudest thing here. The heart attack 3 years ago had drawn a thick, black line through my life, dividing it into a before and an after. Before, my body was a reliable tool I rarely thought about. It could haul lumber, endure long hours in the workshop, and feel the satisfying burn of a day's hard labor. After, it became a fragile machine I had to constantly monitor. The doctor's words were a permanent echo in my mind, a patched-up engine. He'd called my heart, one that couldn't handle any unnecessary strain. So the simple pleasures were retired along with me. No more Sunday morning bacon sizzling in the pan. No more wrestling with stubborn oak in my woodshop. And certainly, no more of the slow, contemplative glass of single malt whiskey I used to savor as the sun bled across the horizon. My life had become a landscape of no mores. My gaze drifted toward the workshop at the edge of the lawn, its windows dark and dusty. Through the grime, I could just make out the shape of an old project shrouded in a gray tarp. It was a scale model of the USS Constitution. Every plank, every cannon, every intricate line of rigging had been a lesson in patience. Leo and I had started it when he was 10, a gangly kid with a mind far too serious for his age. I could still conjure the memory with perfect clarity, the sharp, clean scent of wood glue and sawdust, the delicate feel of the tiny wooden pieces between my calloused fingers, and the sight of his small hands, so steady and precise, as he'd fitted a miniature plank onto the ship's hull. His face, pinched in intense concentration, would suddenly break into a brilliant, unreserved smile whenever a piece clicked perfectly into place. "We did it, Dad," he'd whisper, as if we'd just accomplished some grand feat of engineering. We worked on it for years, a slow and steady collaboration that saw him through middle school and into his teens. Then came college, a fast-track career in pharmaceutical sales, a wedding. The ship, 3/4 finished, was draped with a tarp and relegated to the corner, a monument to a time that was gone, just like us. We hadn't truly spoken in 3 years, not since the day we buried his mother. In the cold, sterile quiet of the limousine. He had turned to me, his face pale and tight, with a grief that had curdled into anger. "You never saw how tired she was," he'd hissed, the words like shards of glass. "You just let her work herself to death for you." The accusation, so unfair and born of such pain, had blasted a canyon between us. A canyon I no longer had the strength or the will to try and cross. That's why the sound of a delivery truck, its tires crunching loudly on my gravel driveway, felt so alien. It was a disruption to the day's predictable to the Avenue 2. Silent rhythm. I didn't order things. My groceries came on Thursdays. This was a Tuesday. I watched from the swing as a young man in a crisp brown uniform jogged to the porch, placed a single, medium-sized box on the top step, gave a quick, impersonal wave, and vanished as quickly as he'd appeared. For a long minute, I just stared at the box. It was anonymous, plain brown cardboard, sealed with packing tape. My first thought was that it was a mistake, but my name and address were on the label, printed in stark black letters. Curiosity. A feeling so dormant it felt foreign finally pushed me to my feet. My knees protested as I stood. Inside, I set the box on the big oak kitchen table, the one Sarah used to say was the heart of our home. It was scarred with decades of homework, family dinners, and spilled glasses of milk. My fingers, gnarled and stiff with arthritis, fumbled with the tough packing tape. Annoyed, I grabbed a paring knife from the block and slit the box open with a satisfying rip. Inside, nestled in a bed of crinkly shredded paper, was a handsome wooden box, its surface polished to a dark, deep shine like mahogany. I lifted the heavy lid. It was a bottle of single malt whiskey, resting in a cradle of dark green silk. The bottle itself was a work of art, elegant and sculpted. The label was all understated class, a swirl of calligraphy on thick, creamy paper. Glenmorangie Pride. 1978. As a man who once deeply appreciated the craft, I knew what I was looking at. This wasn't just a nice bottle of scotch. This was an artifact. This was a four-figure gesture, a collector's piece you displayed, not drank. Tucked into the silk lining was a small, simple white card. 2 words were written on it. Happy birthday. The handwriting was a jolt, sharp and impatient, slanted hard to the right. I didn't need a signature. It was Leo's. My stomach tightened. The hope that flickered was faint. A dying ember. I knew I shouldn't try to stoke. Maybe this is it. A foolish, fatherly part of my brain whispered, maybe he's finally reaching out. But a colder, heavier reality quickly extinguished it. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a performance. Leo knew everything about my health. He had been there in the hospital, listening with that detached, clinical focus as the cardiologist laid out the new rules of my existence. He knew I hadn't touched a drop of alcohol in 3 years. He knew the doctor had said, in no uncertain terms, that a shock to my system, like hard liquor, could trigger a fatal cardiac event. So what was this? A monumentally tone-deaf gift from a son who had forgotten the details of his father's fragile life? No, Leo never forgot details. This was intentional. This was a message. It was a carefully chosen symbol of the life I used to have, the man I used to be, presented to me on a silk pillow. It felt less like a gift and more like a beautifully packaged insult, a reminder of my own frailty, sent by the one person whose presence in my life had become a constant, aching voigt. I stood there for a long time in the silent kitchen, the magnificent bottle gleaming under the overhead light. I could almost taste the memory of a fine whiskey, the smoky peat, the warm burn in the chest. The sensation was so real it made my mouth water, and that made the gesture feel even crueler. I wouldn't let it sit on my shelf. $1,000 monument to my son's contempt. A beautiful thing shouldn't be poisoned by bad intentions. It deserved to be enjoyed. And then I thought of Marcus. Marcus Thorne, Leo's father-in-law. A good man. Through and through. A retired plumber with hands like leather mitts and a laugh that could shake the rafters. He'd helped me patch my roof after that bad ice storm 2 winters back and had practically wrestled me to the ground when I tried to pay him. He was a man who understood the value of things, and he truly appreciated a fine whiskey. To him, this bottle would be a treasure, not a torment. The decision, once made, felt like a weight lifting. I picked up the old landline from the wall. Marcus Rex here. Rex, well, I'll be. Happy birthday. You old goat 68. Huh, you're catching up to me, his voice, warm and gravelly, boomed through the receiver. It was a welcome sound. I managed a genuine chuckle, trying my best. Listen. A strange thing happened. I've come into possession of something I think you'd appreciate. My son sent me a rather extravagant bottle of whiskey for my birthday. Oh yeah, is the boy finally coming around? Marcus asked, a hopeful note in his voice. Let's just say it's a complicated gesture. I said, the words tasting like ash. The point is, it's completely wasted on me these days. I'd be honored if you'd take it. Enjoy it on my behalf. There was a genuine hesitation. Rex, I couldn't possibly. That's a gift from your son to you. And I'm re-gifting it to my friend. I insisted, a firm edge to my voice. Please, Marcus, it would genuinely make me happy to know it's being enjoyed. Not just collecting dust on a shelf like an accusation. He finally, reluctantly, agreed. A little while later, his dusty old Ford pickup rumbled into my driveway. His eyes went wide when he saw the box. He lifted the bottle out with a reverence that told me I'd made the right choice. My goodness. Rex. He whistled, his voice low with awe. This isn't just top shelf. This is the shelf. The top shelf stuff dreams of being on. Are you absolutely 100% sure about this? I'm sure, I said, and the relief I felt was immense and cleansing. Just promise you'll have a glass for me. He clapped me on the shoulder, his big hand warm and solid on my back. You bet your life I will. I'll pour one the minute I get home and toast to your health. A bottle like this, Rex. One sip is probably enough to send you straight to heaven. We both shared a hearty laugh. I stood on the porch and watched him drive away, the handsome wooden box sitting on the passenger seat like a guest of honor. For the first time all day, a genuine sense of peace settled over me. I had taken an object of pain and transformed it into a moment of friendship and generosity. I had won. Not 10 minutes after Marcus's truck had disappeared down the road, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID. Leo. My heart, that traitorous old engine, gave a nervous thump against my ribs. I let it ring 3 times, composing myself before picking it up. Hello. Dad, hey. Just calling to see if you got my gift. His voice was unnaturally bright, polished to a high sheen. It was his salesman voice. The one designed to build rapport and close a deal. It wasn't the voice of a son checking in on his old man. I did. Leo. It arrived this morning. Thank you. My own voice was flat, betraying nothing. Of course. It's a special occasion. After all. So, did you try it yet? The question was too quick, too eager. A cold prickle, sharp as a needle, traced a line down my spine. You know I can't drink anymore. Son, we've been over this. Right. Right. The heart. I forgot. He said. The lie so blatant, it was almost insulting. But you know, for a birthday, a small celebratory taste wouldn't hurt. Would it? For old time's sake. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the air feeling suddenly cold in my lungs. I gave it away. Leo. Silence. It was absolute, not a pause for thought, but a dead, digital void on the other end of the line. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds. I could hear the hum of my refrigerator in the quiet Thames. When he finally spoke, every trace of artificial warmth was gone. His voice was flat, hard, and cold as a slab of granite. You what? I gave it to Marcus. I said, my own voice quiet but firm. He's a man who can appreciate it properly. Another pause. This one crackling with a furious, contained energy. You gave it to Marcus Thorne. He bit off each word, as if it were poison in his mouth. Why in God's name would you do that? I just told you, so it wouldn't go to waste. I'll call you back. He snapped, and the line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, a profound and sickening unease washing over me. The violent shift in his tone had been more than jarring. It was revealing. That wasn't disappointment in his voice. It wasn't the petty frustration of a gift being unappreciated. It was something else entirely. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of panic. It was the sound of a carefully laid plan, a plan I couldn't yet comprehend going horribly, terribly wrong. I stood rooted in the middle of my kitchen, the familiar silence of my home suddenly feeling charged and menacing. My phone shrieked from the countertop. The sound so loud and piercing it made me jump. I grabbed it, my first thought being that it was Leo, calling back to rage or explain, but the screen showed a different name, Carol Thorne. I answered, a knot of pure, cold dread tightening in my stomach. I could hear sirens, loud and close, wailing in the background on her end before she even spoke a word. And when she did, her voice was a ragged, breathless sound of pure terror that would be burned into my memory for the rest of my days. Rex, oh God. Rex. It's Marcus. He just collapsed. We're in the ambulance now. The world dissolved into a tunnel of sound, Carol's ragged sobs on one end of the line, the piercing wail of sirens on the other. And in the middle, the frantic, useless thumping of my own heart against my ribs. Time seemed to warp and stretch. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember starting the car. The familiar streets of my town, lined with houses where people were sitting down to dinner and watching television, became a meaningless blur outside my windshield. My mind was a frantic machine, trying to connect gears that refused to mesh. Marcus, a bottle of whiskey, a collapsed man, the icy, panicked voice of my son. The pieces were there, scattered and sharp, and the shape they were forming was too monstrous to contemplate. The hospital emergency room was a world of controlled chaos. The air was thick with the sterile, chemical smell of antiseptic, a scent that immediately transported me back to the long, hopeless weeks I'd spent here with Sarah. Nurses and doctors moved with a brisk, urgent efficiency that made my own slow, heavy movements feel out of place. I found Carol in a small, grim waiting area, her face pale and blotchy. Her body curled into a plastic chair as if trying to make herself smaller. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wide and lost. "Rex," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They won't tell me anything. Just that his heart, it just stopped." I sat beside her, the plastic of the chair cold against my legs. I didn't know what to say. The platitudes, "He's strong. He'll be okay," felt like lies in my mouth. A young doctor with tired eyes and a grin set to his jaw finally came out to speak with us. His words were clinical, detached, a buffer against the raw emotion of our reality. "Mr. Thorne is stable for now," he began, and I felt Carol's hand grip my arm. "We had to resuscitate him. His heart went into arrhythmia. Frankly, he's very lucky the paramedics got to him so quickly. We're running a full toxicology screen. But right now, the initial presentation looks like a case of acute poisoning. Did he ingest anything unusual this evening?" Carol looked at him, bewildered. "No, nothing. He came home. He was so happy. He had that whiskey you gave him." "Rex." Her voice trailed off as she looked at me, her eyes clouded with confusion, not accusation. Then she seemed to remember something. "He wanted to save the glass. He said it was too good to just wash away. The paramedics brought it in his effects." She pointed to a clear plastic bag on the counter of the nurse's station, containing Marcus's wallet, his keys, and a heavy crystal tumbler. A single finger of amber liquid still pooled at the bottom. That glass, seeing it, sitting there, clinical and sterile under the fluorescent lights, was like a physical blow. The doctor's words echoed in my head. Acute poisoning. My mind flashed back to Leo's voice on the phone, the dead silence. The cold, flat anger. "You gave it to Marcus Thorne." It wasn't the question of a disappointed son. It was the question of an assassin whose bullet had struck the wrong target. The drive home from the hospital was a slow-motion nightmare. The world outside my car was the same streetlights, casting pools of lonely yellow light. The same houses dark and quiet for the night, but my perception of it had been fundamentally, irrevocably altered. My entire life, my entire history with my son, was being re-edited in my mind. Every memory was now tainted, viewed through this new, horrifying lens. The gift box on the table, the silk lining, the beautiful, expensive bottle, the eager question, "Did you try it yet?" The chilling silence when he learned I hadn't. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a cruel joke. It was a plan, a meticulous, cold-blooded plan. The word murder surfaced in my thoughts, ugly and undeniable. He had meant for that doctor to be talking about me. He had meant for me to be the one lying in that hospital bed. Or more likely, in the morgue. My son, my own flesh and blood, had tried to kill me. Back in my kitchen. The silence was different now. It was no longer just empty, it was predatory. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a crime scene. The Glenmorangie bottle sat on the counter where I'd left it, its elegant shape now looking sinister, grotesque. It was a loaded weapon left behind at the scene. My first coherent thought was that I couldn't leave it there. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't let anyone else touch it. My mind, numbed with shock, shifted into a strange, methodical gear. It was the part of me that knew how to build things, how to follow a blueprint, how to solve a problem one step at a time. I went to the pantry and pulled on a pair of yellow rubber dishwashing gloves. Carefully, I placed the whiskey bottle into a large Ziploc bag and sealed it shut. I did the same with the box and the birthday card. The half-full tumbler from the hospital went into its own bag. I couldn't call the police. Not yet. What would I tell them? My son gave me a birthday gift, and now his father-in-law is in the hospital. I think he tried to kill me. They would see a grieving, confused old man and a tragic family accident. They would see a domestic drama, not a homicide investigation. I needed proof, something irrefutable. My thoughts turned to the packaging. The box it came in. I had thrown it in the recycling bin by the back door, my gloved hands trembling slightly. I retrieved the cardboard box and the packing material, and as I sifted through the shredded paper, my fingers brushed against something small and hard. I pulled it out. It was a tiny glass vial, no bigger than my thumb, completely unmarked. It was empty, but when I held it to the light, I could see a faint, almost invisible oily residue clinging to the inside. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was this? The container. I placed the vial into its own small Ziploc bag. My mind racing. This was it. This had to be it. I knew I couldn't figure this out on my own. I needed help. But not from the police. Not yet. I needed someone I could trust. I thought of Dave Petrie. We'd worked together at the same engineering firm for 30 years before we both retired. Dave had spent the last decade of his career in quality control. Running the on-site materials lab, he was meticulous, discreet, and he owed me a favor after I'd helped him build the deck on his new house. My hands were shaking so badly I had to dial his number twice. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Rex, it's almost midnight. Everything okay?" I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady. I couldn't sound hysterical. "Dave, I'm sorry to call so late. I need a favor. A strange one, and it needs to be completely off the books." "I'm listening," he said, his voice instantly alert. "I was given a bottle of expensive whiskey. I think it might be contaminated. Something is very wrong with it. A friend of mine drank some and is in the hospital. Can you test a sample for me? Quietly. I just need to know what's in it." There was a pause. "Contaminated how?" "I don't know." I lied. "It just tastes off. I have a bad feeling. Can you do it or not?" "Yeah." "Rex." "Yeah." "Of course," he said. "Bring it by in the morning. I still have my key to the old lab. No one will know a thing." After I hung up, a wave of exhaustion, so profound it was like a physical weight washed over me. I hid the bagged evidence in the cool, dark space of my old wine cellar, tucking the tiny vial inside a hollowed-out book on a dusty shelf. As I climbed the stairs back to the kitchen, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text message from Leo. My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, at the glowing white letters. "Heard about Marcus. Terrible news. Carol said they think it was food poisoning. Hope he recovers soon." The blatant, calculated lie was breathtaking in its cruelty. It wasn't just a lie. It was a probe. He was testing the waters, trying to find out what I knew, what the official story was. He was monitoring his experiment. I felt a surge of nausea, so powerful I had to grip the edge of the counter. This wasn't just a son I didn't recognize anymore. This was a monster wearing his face. The next morning, after a sleepless night spent staring at the shadows in my ceiling, I drove a small, sealed sample of the whiskey to Dave's house. I also gave him the half-full tumbler. I didn't mention the vial. Something told me to keep that to myself. For now, he promised he'd have results for me as soon as possible. On the drive home, a new, terrible thought began to creep into the edges of my mind. The vial. I had hidden it, but how secure was my house? Leo had a key. He hadn't used it in years, but he still had it. As soon as I got home, I went straight to the cellar, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm. I pulled the old base, leather-bound copy of Moby Dick from the shelf. My fingers searched for the familiar small, hard shape within its hollowed-out pages. There was nothing. I pulled the book out, shaking it frantically. Empty. The vial was gone. A cold, paralyzing terror gripped me. It was a fear unlike any I had ever known. It wasn't the fear of a heart attack or the fear of dying. It was the fear of being hunted. He had been here. Sometime in the night, while I was upstairs staring at the ceiling, he had entered my house, my sanctuary, and he had retrieved his piece of evidence. The locks on my doors suddenly felt as useless as paper. The walls of my house felt as thin as glass. I was living in a cage with a predator who had the key. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in my old armchair in the living room, in the dark, every creak of the old house making me jump. The man in the family photos on the mantel, the proud father with his arm around us smiling. Gap-toothed boy was a stranger to me now. I stared at a picture of Leo at his high school graduation, his face bright with promise. And I tried to pinpoint the exact moment when the boy I loved had vanished, replaced by the cold-eyed monster who had texted me about food poisoning while his father-in-law fought for his life. Had I missed the signs? Had I been so lost in my own grief for Sarah that I hadn't seen the darkness growing in my own son? The questions were a form of torture, a feedback loop of guilt and horror with no escape. The phone rang just after dawn. It was Dave. His voice was completely different from the day before. The friendly, casual tone was gone, replaced by a grim, professional gravity. "Rex," he said, his voice low, "you need to get to a police station. Right now." "What is it?" "Dave, what did you find?" "It's not contamination." "Rex, it's poison. White snake root. A concentrated tincture. It's an old poison. It mimics cardiac arrest. It's notoriously difficult to detect in a standard autopsy unless you're specifically looking for it." He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. "And Rex, the dosage. It's not random. I ran the numbers. For a healthy man like Marcus, it's enough to cause severe illness, maybe permanent heart damage. But for a man your size, with your known cardiac history, Rex, this was a kill shot. It was measured for you." The world fell away, the last shred of doubt, the tiny, insane sliver of hope that this was all some horrific misunderstanding, evaporated. Dave's words were the final, scientific confirmation of the truth my heart already knew. It wasn't just an attempt, it was a bespoke, tailor-made execution. My son, the little boy whose hands I had guided to build a model ship, had grown up to weigh and measure my death. A strange calm settled over me. The terror and the grief receded, replaced by a cold, the hard resolve that felt like steel solidifying in my veins. The victim part of me died in that moment. And something else was born. I was no longer a grieving father. I was a witness, and I was going to make sure the truth was heard. I showered, shaved, and put on the suit I had worn to Sarah's funeral. I gathered the evidence, the sealed bottle of whiskey, the presentation box, the birthday card. I took my phone, with Leo's damning text message saved on the screen, and I wrote down every detail I could remember. From the moment the package arrived to the sound of Dave's voice, in a small notebook. The police station was a drab, bureaucratic place that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I was eventually shown into a small, windowless interrogation room to speak with a man named Detective Miller. He was a big man, rumpled and tired-looking, with a cynicism in his eyes that told me he'd heard every story imaginable. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and listened with a kind of weary patience as I laid out my story. I presented it calmly, logically, pushing the evidence across the metal table, one piece at a time. The bottle, the card, the text message, the lab report Dave had emailed me. I could see the skepticism in his eyes begin to waver, replaced by a flicker of interest. He leaned forward, picking up the bagged birthday card. Studying Leo's handwriting, he read the text message on my phone twice. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, just looking at me. "It's a hell of a story, Mr. Dalton," he said finally, his voice a low grumble. "The lab report is compelling. The text is suspicious. But your son will have a lawyer who will call this a tragic coincidence. He'll say you're a grieving, vindictive father. Right now, it's your word against his." My heart sank. "So you can't do anything?" Detective Miller steepled his fingers, his eyes boring into mine. A new look was there now. A hunter's look. "I didn't say that. We have enough to be very, very interested. But to get a search warrant for his property, to really lock this down, we need something more. We need something that isn't just circumstantial. We need something that comes from his own mouth." He leaned even closer, his voice dropping. "And I think you're going to be the one to help us get it." The air in the small, windowless room seemed to crackle with the weight of Detective Miller's words. "I think you're going to be the one to help us get it." For a moment, I didn't understand. I had brought them the weapon, the motive, the scientific proof. I was the victim. But as I looked into his tired, unblinking eyes, I saw the truth of his position. I was also their best, and perhaps only, tool. The cold resolve that had settled over me earlier now had to be tempered into something sharper, something more dangerous. I had to become an actor. I had to perform the role of the dying man my son had intended me to be. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, and my voice sounded distant to my own ears, as if it belonged to someone else. Someone far braver and more calculating than the retired engineer sitting in a cheap plastic chair. Miller leaned forward, the cynicism in his face replaced by a focused, predatory intensity. "We need to get him on a recorded line. We need him to talk about the whiskey. We need him to talk about your symptoms, the ones you're going to pretend to have. We need him to say something that ties him directly to the poison, something that shows he had knowledge no innocent person could possess." He laid out the plan with a grim, methodical clarity. I would go home. A technical team would discreetly rig my phone to record, and then I would make the most difficult phone call of my life. I would call my son and pretend to be dying. The drive back to my house was surreal. I sat in the passenger seat of Miller's unmarked sedan. A silent, hulking presence beside me. The familiar world outside the window, kids riding bikes. Neighbors watering their lawns, seemed like a scene from a movie I was no longer a part of. My own life had shifted into a different genre. A dark, quiet thriller, where my own home was about to become the stage for the final act. Two plainclothes technicians, a young man and woman who looked like they'd be more at home in a coffee shop than a police operation, were waiting for us. They were quiet, efficient, and respectful, but their presence felt like an intrusion of the highest order. They moved through my house, a place filled with the ghosts of 30 years of memories with Sarah, and saw only tactical angles and electronic opportunities. One of them attached a small, innocuous-looking device to the back of the old landline phone in the kitchen. It's voice-activated, the young woman explained softly. The moment you pick up, the recording starts. We'll be monitoring from the van down the street. The detective will be here with you. I looked at the phone. It was the same phone Sarah had used to call her sister every Sunday morning. The same phone I'd used to order pizza on Friday nights when Leo was a boy. The same phone that had delivered the news of my father's passing. No. It was a weapon. A trap. Miller dismissed the technicians and then turned to me. The kitchen felt unnaturally quiet and still. Are you ready for this? Rex? He asked, his voice low. Was I ready? How could anyone be ready for this? How do you prepare to use the sound of your own voice? Feigning weakness and pain. To condemn your own child to prison. A part of me, the fatherly part that was now wounded and bleeding out, wanted to scream that this was wrong, that it was a monstrous perversion of nature. But a colder, harder part of me, the part that had seen Marcus lying pale and still in a hospital bed, knew this was the only way. Justice had to be served, even if I had to carve it out of my own heart. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We waited for an hour. Miller said it had to be the right time, late enough in the afternoon that Leo would likely be home from work, but not so late that a call about feeling unwell would be immediately suspicious. I sat at the kitchen table, the one where Leo had once done his homework, and I rehearsed the words in my head. I thought about the day after my heart attack, the genuine weakness, the shortness of breath, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. I would have to summon that ghost, wear its skin, and make it real for my son. Finally, Miller gave a sharp nod. It's time. My hand trembled as I reached for the receiver. The plastic felt slick and cold beneath my fingers. My heart, my patched up, unreliable engine, began to hammer against my ribs. Affrontique. Panicked, drumbeat. For a terrifying second, I thought I was going to have another heart attack. Right here. Right now. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and pictured Marcus's face. I pictured the terror in his wife's eyes, and the trembling in my hand stopped. I dialed the number from memory. It rang once, twice, a third time. Then, his voice, smooth and confident. Hello. I took another breath, forcing a weak, reedy tremor into my voice. Leo, I whispered. Dad, is that you? You sound terrible. The feigned concern was immediate. Flawless. He was a natural performer. Leo, I don't feel so good. I managed, letting my words slur just slightly. Something's wrong. Wrong. What do you mean wrong? The curiosity was already starting to peek through the performance of worry. I just I feel strange. My heart is racing. And there's this weird taste in my mouth. Like metal. I let my voice crack on the last word. Leaning heavily on the script, Miller and I had worked out. There was a pause on the other end of the line. And in that brief silence, I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. This was it. This was what he had been waiting for. The experiment was finally yielding results. A metallic taste, he asked, and the concern in his voice was now tinged with an unmistakable note of clinical, academic interest. That's interesting. What about your heart rate? Is it erratic? Or just fast? I don't know. I stammered, clutching my chest for effect. Even though he couldn't see me, it feels like it's fluttering. I'm dizzy. Leo, I'm really dizzy. Okay. Stay calm. Dad, he said. But there was no comfort in his voice. It was the voice of a scientist directing a test subject. Any numbness tingling in your extremities, your hands or feet, he was going down a checklist. His checklist, the symptoms he had researched. The coldness of it all was so profound it almost made me break character. He wasn't talking to his father. He was talking to a set of biological responses. The love, the history, the shared blood between us meant absolutely nothing. I was just data. It was time. I steadied myself for the final move. It's just like what happened to Marcus. I whispered, letting a note of panicked realization enter my voice. Oh God. Leo. I think it was the whiskey. Another silence. This one was different. It was a silence filled with calculation. I had introduced a new variable. Un unexpected data point. I had linked my symptoms to the other victim. I could hear a faint sound, like him tapping a pen against a desk. He was thinking. He was trying to figure out how to handle this. And then, he made his fatal mistake. His arrogance, his need to be the smartest person in the room, got the better of him. That's impossible. Dad, he said, his voice sharp and dismissive. How would you know what his symptoms were? No one released that information. The air in my kitchen solidified. Miller, who had been standing perfectly still by the back door, locked eyes with me. His face was like stone, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Triumph. Leo couldn't have known that. Carol was too distraught to give details, and the hospital wouldn't release specifics to anyone but immediate family. Only the person who had designed the symptoms would know what they were. The trap, so carefully set, had just snapped shut with a deafening, final clang. I didn't have to act anymore. A genuine wave of faintness washed over me, the result of sheer, adrenaline-fueled relief. I have to go, I mumbled, and let the receiver clatter back into its cradle. I slumped into a kitchen chair, my body feeling boneless, my shirt soaked with sweat. Miller crossed the room in 2 strides and put a heavy hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, grounding. You did it. Rex, he said, his voice a low rumble. You did good. We have him. The technical team came back in, their faces impassive as they collected their equipment. The house was mine again, but the violation lingered. Miller explained what would happen next, based on my testimony, the lab results, and now the self-incriminating recording. A judge was signing a search warrant for Leo's apartment and his office as we spoke. Teams were already moving into position. And then, they were gone. I was left alone in the aftermath. The silence of the house rushing back in to fill the void. The waiting was a new kind of torture. I paced the floors, from the kitchen to the living room and back again, my mind replaying the phone call over and over. I saw my son's face, not as the cold-blooded monster he had become, but as the 10-year-old boy with sawdust in his hair, his eyes shining with pride over a perfectly fitted piece of a wooden ship. And I felt a wave of grief so profound it brought me to my knees. I wasn't grieving for the man my son had become. I was grieving for the boy he used to be. The boy I had lost so long ago I hadn't even noticed he was gone. An hour later, my phone rang again. It was Miller. "We're in," he said. His voice, all business. He was just as surprised as we'd hoped, didn't have time to destroy anything. "Did you find it?" I asked. My voice hoarse. "Find what?" "I don't know," I admitted. "The rest of the poison. Something. Anything. We're still looking. But Rex, this place is more like a laboratory than an apartment. He's got chemical glassware, beakers, scales. And we found something else. A journal." My breath caught in my throat. "It's a detailed notebook." "Rex," Miller continued, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and disgust. "He's got pages and pages of notes, research on various toxins. He documents experiments on rodents he bought from a pet store. He recorded their symptoms, their time to death. He was perfecting his method." I sank into my armchair. The phone pressed hard against my ear. This was a darkness I couldn't have imagined, a level of cold, meticulous evil that belonged in a horror movie. Not in my family. "We found the entry." "Rex," Miller said, his voice dropping even lower. "It's from 2 weeks ago. He details the final preparation of a tincture of a Geratina altissima, white snake root. He notes the purchase of the Glenmorangie whiskey, describing it as the perfect delivery mechanism due to its complex flavor profile, which would mask any residual bitterness from the concentrate Millepause. And I heard him clear his throat. And then there's the final notation at the bottom of the page. It's a dosage calculation. I closed my eyes, bracing myself. It just says, FD, your initials, Rex. Next to it, he's written 2 ounces est, lethal dose. Oh, with. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Hearing it. Hearing the cold, scientific language of my own murder, read aloud, was the final, brutal confirmation. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was a project. I was his project, and he had documented its final, fatal step with the same dispassionate precision as a chemist recording a routine experiment. "We have everything we need, Rex," Miller said gently. "It's over. He's in custody." I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel victory. I felt a profound, bottomless emptiness. The hunt was over, but the cost was the last lingering memory of the son I had loved. Later that evening, Miller asked me to come down to the station to give a final, formal statement. As I was walking down a long, sterile corridor, another set of officers came through a door at the other end, and between them, in handcuffs, was Leo. Our eyes met across the length of the hallway. For a split second, I saw a flicker of the little boy I remembered, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by a look of such pure lime, venomous hatred that it felt like a physical blow. His face was a mask of incandescent rage. The polite, charming salesman was gone. The cold, meticulous scientist was gone. All that was left was the monster, stripped bare and cornered. He lunged against the officers holding him, his body straining, his voice a raw, guttural roar that echoed off the cinder block walls. "You'll pay for this." "You old bastard," he screamed, his eyes locked on mine. "You think this is over. This isn't the end. This isn't the end." His scream, raw and guttural, echoed off the cinder block walls of the corridor, long after the officers had dragged him through a set of steel doors. "This isn't the end." The words hung in the sterile air. "FIL, desperate course." I stood there, rooted to the spot, the sound vibrating in my bones. Detective Miller's hand was a heavy, steadying presence on my shoulder. But I barely felt it. All I could see was the memory of my son's face, twisted into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. The boy I had raised, the young man I had been proud of, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a monster of his own making. And in that moment, looking into his eyes, I had finally, truly, accepted it. The weeks leading up to the trial were a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. My life, which had already been quiet, became even more insular. The outside world seemed to operate on a frequency I could no longer tune into. Days were measured not in hours, but in meetings with a kind but weary-eyed prosecutor, a woman named Miss Alvarez, who had the difficult job of helping a father bury his son. Metaphorically speaking, she walked me through what would happen, the questions she would ask, and more importantly, the questions they would ask Leo's defense attorney, a man whose slick, expensive suit I had only seen in pictures, was apparently notorious for his ability to turn victims into aggressors on the witness stand. My quiet house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a waiting room. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. The lock on my back door, the one Leo had a key to, had been changed, but the sense of violation lingered. I felt like a ghost in my own home, haunted not by the past, but by a future that was barreling down on me. A future that would require me to sit in a courtroom and publicly declare that my only child had tried to murder me. The first day of the trial, I put on the same suit I had worn to the police station. It felt like a uniform now, the armor for this final, terrible battle. The courtroom was exactly as I had imagined it, imposing and impersonal. All dark, polished wood, and stiflingly still air that smelled of old paper, floor wax, and a faint, collective human anxiety. I sat behind Miss Tenderdez, Alvarez, my hands resting on my knees to keep them from shaking. I refused to look at the defendant's table. I knew he was there. I could feel the sheer force of his hatred like a physical heat across the room. But I would not give him the satisfaction of meeting his gaze. The first few days were a procession of testimony. The paramedics who had responded to the call for Marcus, the emergency room doctor who had spoken of acute poisoning, Dave, my old friend, looking uncomfortable in a borrowed suit, who explained with scientific certainty the nature of white snake root and the precise, lethal dosage that had been measured for a man with my specific health profile. With every witness, Miss Alvarez laid another brick in the wall of evidence, a structure so solid and undeniable it seemed impossible to breach. Then, it was my turn. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking a tightrope over a canyon. Every eye in the room was on me. The jury, a panel of ordinary faces trying to comprehend an extraordinary evil, watched me with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I sat in the chair, swore the oath, and for the first time, I forced myself to look at my son. He was thinner, pâle, but his eyes burned with the same incandescent rage I had seen in the police station corridor. He stared at me, unblinking, trying to intimidate me, trying to will me into silence. I held his gaze, and, with a quiet, internal finality, I let the last vestige of the father I had been die. In my heart, I was no longer looking at my son. I was looking at the man who had tried to kill me. Miss Alvarez was gentle. She guided me through the story with a quiet compassion, her questions allowing me to tell the jury everything, from the strange, cold feeling the gift had given me, to the chilling phone call, to the moment of horror in the hospital waiting room. I spoke in a low, steady voice, focusing on a spot on the back wall, recounting the facts without emotion, just as she had coached me. Then, it was his turn. Leo's attorney, a man named Davies, with a predatory smile and eyes like chips of ice, approached the stand. His voice was smooth as silk, a weapon wrapped in velvet. "Mr. Dalton," he began, his tone dripping with sympathy. "This must be incredibly difficult for you, to be estranged from your only child, to see him in such a predicament. He is in this predicament because he tried to murder me," I said, my voice keyed but firm. Davies' smile didn't falter. "Or perhaps," he suggested, turning to the jury, "he is in this predicament because his lonely, grieving father, a man bitter about his son's success and independence, has concocted a fantastic story to punish him for a perceived lack of attention." And so it began. For hours, he twisted every memory, every fact, into a weapon against me. My gift of the whiskey to Marcus wasn't an act of friendship. It was a passive-aggressive attempt to reject his son. My suspicion wasn't the logical conclusion of a concerned man. It was the paranoia of a vindictive one. He painted me as a controlling, resentful old man, jealous of the life Leo had built without me. With every question, he chipped away at my character, trying to find a crack, trying to make the jury doubt the quiet, heartbroken man sitting before them. I gripped the wooden railing of the witness box, my knuckles white, and I held on to the truth. I answered every question with the same flat, factual tone, refusing to rise to his bait, refusing to let him see the raw, bleeding wound he was probing. The final day was for the prosecution's physical evidence. Miss Alvarez presented the bottle of Glenmorangie, the birthday card, the lab reports. She played the recording of the phone call, and the sound of my own feigned weakness filled the silent courtroom, followed by Leo's clinical, curious questions and his final, fatal slip. How would you know what his symptoms were? A low murmur went through the courtroom. And then, Miss Alvarez brought out the final piece, the journal. She placed the leather-bound notebook on the overhead projector, and the image of a page, filled with Leo's sharp, impatient handwriting, appeared on the large screen behind her for the entire court to see. The silence in the room became absolute, profound. It was a silence so heavy you could feel it pressing down on your skin. The jury leaned forward as one. Miss Alvarez read from the page, her voice clear and devoid of emotion. She read about the experiments on the rodents. She read about the masking properties of a complex single malt. And then she came to the final entry, and on the bottom of the page, Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is the final calculation. She pointed a laser at the last two lines on the screen. The letters were stark and black against the white page. FD. Dos onza. Est. Lethal dose. In that moment, something in Leo broke. The mask of calm. Arrogant composure he had maintained throughout the trial shattered into a million pieces. He shot to his feet, his chair screeching backward on the polished floor. "It's a lie," he screamed, his voice a raw, unhinged shriek. "He faked it, he planted it. The old bastard has been trying to ruin my life for years." He lunged toward the witness stand, his face a contorted mask of pure rage, his eyes wild. Davies tried to grab his arm, but Leo threw him off. Two bailiffs tackled him before he could take more than 2 steps, wrestling him to the ground as he continued to scream, spitting curses. His carefully constructed world crumbling into dust around him in a public, humiliating spectacle of his own making. It didn't take the jury long. When they filed back into the courtroom an hour later, their faces were grim and set. I didn't look at Leo. I looked at the face of the jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes. As she handed the verdict to the bailiff, the court clerk read the single word that had been the fulcrum of my life for months. Guilty. The word didn't bring the rush of victory I might have expected. It was just a heavy, quiet finality, the sound of a door slamming shut, a chapter ending. The sentencing was 2 weeks later. Attempted murder in the 1st degree. The judge, citing the chilling, premeditated nature of the crime, gave him the maximum 25 years in a state penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for the first 15. As the bailiffs came to lead him away, one last time, he stopped. He turned, and his cuffed hands, and he looked directly at me. The wild rage was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian hatred that was somehow even more terrifying. "This isn't the final chapter," he hissed, his voice a low promise. I met his gaze, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No pain, no lingering love, no grief, just emptiness. I leaned forward slightly and said, the words meant only for him. For me, it is. And I watched them lead my son away, stepping out of the courthouse and into the bright, cold afternoon sun was like surfacing after being held under water for a very long time. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The clean, fresh air filling my lungs, the sounds of the city, the traffic, the distant sirens, the chatter of people passing by rushed in. And for the first time in months, they sounded like life, not like threats. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was a profound, aching sense of release. The weight I had been carrying, the weight of his hatred, of my fear, of our broken history, simply lifted. A few weeks later, I went to visit Marcus. He was back home, moving a little slower, a new network of fine lines etched around his eyes. But he was alive. We sat on his back porch, a place much like my own, and we drank iced tea. We didn't talk about the trial. We didn't talk about Leo. We talked about the coming winter, about the awful season the Cleveland Browns were having, about the new bird feeder Carol had hung. And in that quiet, unspoken space between us, there was a deep and abiding understanding. We were survivors. Friendship had endured where blood had failed. That evening, I found myself back on my own porch swing. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. I held a mug of coffee in my hands. And this time, it was hot. I took a slow sip. The silence of my home surrounded me once more. But it had changed. It was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of grief and fear. It was just quiet. It was a peaceful emptiness. A blank page waiting to be written on. Justice had been served. The law had provided safety. But I knew, with a certainty that had settled deep in my bones, that peace was something else entirely. Peace was a choice. It was a daily act of turning away from the door you have locked and choosing not to look back at what lies behind it. The story of my son was over. The final chapter had been written. And my story, the quiet, simple story of an old man on his porch, was just beginning again.